People too often overlook the importance of rhetorical discipline in political debate. This is understandable, as the quality of general online discourse has been declining over the past several years. But thankfully, you, a big-brain communist, will have the tools you need to combat common anti-communist logical fallacies, thanks to this compact compilation. Let's get into it. In most debates with people who argue against communism, despite knowing little about the ideology, they will often utilize poor and inaccurate knowledge accumulated from presumably establishment or far-right media sources. This often involves proclaiming a certain feature or characteristic to communism that the ideology and the majority of its followers do not adhere to in the first place. For example, communists want to give everybody equal wages. Alternatively, one can crudely ascribe characteristics or events surrounding the 20th century Marxist-Leninist socialist states to the ideology. For example, people constantly starved under communism. When an opponent uses a strawman in their argument, it can be addressed in a number of ways, the simplest and most effective of which is to directly point out their use of a fallacy in his or her argument, identify what portion of the argument is fallacious, and explain why using one to a few counterpoints with evidence. The explanation part is important, as ideally, a highly effective one will be able to shut down your opponent on the subject, stopping them from further challenging your refutation of their fallacious argument. In some cases, opponents will try to attack your character rather than your argument. Thankfully, this will most likely mean your argument is strong or the arguer is poor at arguing. Alone, an ad hominem attack can be put down fairly easily. You can either quickly reverse the pressure, saying, "Attack the argument, not my character," or more formally state, "Attacking me or my character isn't challenging the merit of the arguments I have made." This quickly puts the focus back on the opponent to develop a proper response to your assertion made prior to their attack. If a clever arguer tries to intertwine an ad hominem attack as a part of a larger statement, it is possible to use it as a stepping stone to help deconstruct the rest of your opponent's argument, provided that you are capable of doing so. This logical fallacy is most often used to undermine the communist ideology by alluding to the extinction of most 20th century Marxist-Leninist socialist states. Any argument involving the appeal to a numerical advantage in favor of modern liberal states generally falls into the range of this fallacy. Typically, it isn't effective to call out and analyze the use of a bandwagon as a fallacy alone, because the point of the argument your opponent is making most likely encompasses this fallacy, and he or she would likely argue the validity of his or her use of said fallacy. Rather, it is wiser to directly address the particular argument the opponent is making, then follow up with the analysis of his or her use of the fallacy as a means to strengthen the larger counter-argument. For example, if your opponent does say, "Communism has clearly failed, almost all modern states are capitalist now," you can explain that these nations were socialist, and they were unable to make it to the 21st century because of coups, economic sabotage, revisionism, etc., and not because the system alone was unable to sustain itself. Then, like frosting on a cake, your counter-argument can close by pointing out the use of the bandwagon and then explaining why using the predominance of liberal capitalist states as a sign of the shortcomings of socialism or communism is not valid, for reasons that can be tied back to the points you made earlier in your counter-argument. Simply put, to tackle the bandwagon fallacy in an argument, it is most often ideal to break down the whole argument first before asserting that said argument was partly or entirely fallacious in its logic all along. Out of any logical fallacy used in anti-communist rhetoric, this one is likely the most unchallenged in any YouTube comment section, Reddit comment section, or chat thread. Anonymity gives a certain freedom to political debate, but not enough so to escape the commitment of logical fallacies in rhetoric. Anti-communists will occasionally bring up a personal account of their relatives' or friends' relatives' displeasure or hatred toward living under a socialist state, most often the USSR for those located in the West. The typical format is that they, or a person they know, tell of their suffering under the oppressive socialist system that subjugated them, starved them, and or impoverished them. Whether the opponent is lying or telling the truth, it is logically fallacious to draw a conclusion regarding the entire socialist state in which this took place, much less the entire communist ideology, on the basis of this single incident, especially in the face of contradicting historical facts, evidence, and statistics. To effectively counter the use of this fallacy in debate, it is necessary to utilize hard evidence contradicting the narrative expressed in the debater's anecdote. This, without questioning the validity of the arguer's account, undermines it, and establishes their tale as an isolated case that does not speak for the rest of the population of the socialist state in question. For example, if an opponent brings up how bad their Cuban-American relatives thought living under socialist Cuba was, then the plethora of evidence showing domestic Cuban support and high opinion of their system can be brought into play. Depending on what factual support the opponent uses, their points, based on those supposed facts, can be challenged with contradicting evidence, thus putting into question the arguer's entire statement. If that isn't enough to put your opponent's anecdote to rest, then you can go further, questioning the reliability of the arguer and therefore reversing the pressure of the debate onto them. If a piece of evidence seems too good to be true for an opponent, they might question the reliability of the information within the source, based purely on its origin. Unless the arguer has either 1. Evidence contradicting the information you presented, or 2. Evidence proving its author is untrustworthy, any claims of reliability based on the source's origin are logically fallacious. Refuting genetic fallacies is fairly simple. Make a direct inquiry to the opponent, questioning them for any counter-evidence, either contradicting the information in your source, or proving that the creator of the source is misleading or inaccurate. Most of the time, the arguer will either be unable to make a valid response, or, in the unlikely case, will provide a discussable reference to which the debate can progress to. So, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I also hope that it will be used to help improve your rhetorical skills for debates and other purposes. Besides that, I'll see you in the next video.